What is it?
Well, it's called Randomiser, and it's fitted to the guidance systems and operates under a very complex scientific principle called potluck. Now, no one knows where we're going. Not even the Black Guardian.
Not even us.
Hello and welcome to our second episode. I'm Tim.
And I'm Charles.
So this is to say spoiler warning for Spyfall Part 2, and of course all of Doctor Who that preceded it. Since recording episode 1, we have watched episode 2 of Spyfall, which I think it's fair to say we both enjoyed.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, so we're going to start off discussing that in a section called How Wrong Were We?
Very. Well, more or less.
Mostly.
I think it was really, really good. It started very well. I loved the whole thing with the plane. You know, it was very Curse of Fatal Death. I'm going back in time to move the sofa, sort of thing.
But I bribed the aeronautics engineer first.
I mean, they even done that bit later in it when the Master turns up. It's like 200 years of sodding sewer, you know.
You're right.
When he turns
up.
Was it
worst 77 years of my life or something?
Yeah. No, it was great fun. Lenny Henry, which we are going to sort of correct the mistake we made last week of starting to talk about him and then completely forget him. So
got sidetracked by a carpet. And yeah, never did go back to him. So yeah, so he has his TED talk, and it's kind of remarkable how little the audience reacted. I think I mean, presumably they're playing a bit of incredulity about him saying, "Okay, it's the end of the world," tee, but yeah, it's an odd scene, I think, but it's kind of fun. He was great, and he survives, so maybe he'll come back.
But he sort of just got away, and there was no kind thing. So I agree that I think he's going to come back. I think the aliens will make another appearance, and I think, well, it'd be a bloody crime if the Master didn't make another appearance later in the series. Because there seems to be a lot of threads that have been left dangling, and it seems that they're setting up quite a lot about technology and so on and so forth. I mean, it was quite interesting. They had Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage. And then when you saw about they were showing the spots in history, they had a picture of Alan Turing.
Very prominently Turing.
Yeah, and so on and so forth. So it's all it's as if they're influencing the aliens and so forth, are influencing the birth of the computer. And
it'd be lovely to see a Turing story.
Oh, they did a book, an Eighth Doctor book. It was one of the series, The Turing Test.
I remember it. It makes me suspect that they're not doing one this season because the photo of Turing was Turing rather than an actor. So if they had planned one already, presumably they might have snuck his photo in there. Although maybe not. Maybe they found a very good lookalike. But I think that is that's the most recognisable photo of Turing. I sort of know it from pretty much every article I've ever seen about him. So the rest of the episode, so the escape from the plane was great fun, and although it wasn't a big surprise, it was a lovely moment where you saw the Doctor remember that she had to do it at the end and run off to fix it, leaving the baffled fam behind.
It was sort of reminiscent of The Big Bang. Remember when he was going back with the broom and getting the fairs and everything,
tidying up everything,
and also Back to the Future too.
Well, this sort of time travel must need an awfully good personal organizer or to-do list or something like that. But I loved the sort of "are we being replaced" line when she pitches up with two other people in tow. It was great fun. So let's talk about Lovelace and Babbage, because I suspect that Chris Chibnall has read a book. I'm sure he's read several. So the book is called The Thrilling Adventures of Lovelace and Babbage, and it's by Sidney Padua. The subtitle is The Mostly True Story of the First Computer. And I bought this a while ago. I've never read it all. I've sort of begun it and looked through it, but it's a long and very in-depth and very well sort of referenced series of comic strips. The author began it as a joke and then sort of slipped into making a webcomic out of imagining that Lovelace and Babbage had survived to have thrilling adventures together, because sadly Ada Lovelace died very young. But the author imagines a pocket universe in which Ada Lovelace resides. And indeed, the book, page 17, if anybody's got it, has a diagram which I think might have even informed the design of the sort of other world. Just showing Chaz the picture now. It's Lovelace sat surrounded by kind of creepy spiral tendrils. Doesn't look exactly like the design with the sort of twisty trees.
I can see where they were going.
She was basically raised in reaction to her father, Lord Byron's licentious ways. She was strictly kept away from poetry and discouraged from anything of the imagination, and instead schooled on mathematics. So she and Babbage were indeed the sort of progenitors of computing technology. Babbage's infamous device, which was beautifully realised in the programme, was called the difference engine, but it never worked. This was the problem. So from what I understand of the history, which isn't much, he burned through many government grants but never quite produced the goods. But they did lay a lot of groundwork. So I think it's a lovely thing to see acknowledged in the programme. And that whole sojourn in 1834 was great fun. But also, I don't know if you found this, I thought that was the master at his most brutal. And it reminded me of early Missy. You know, just casually killing people.
Yeah.
So we were discussing and debating on where in the Master's timeline this version might appear, and that sort of feels to me very pre-Missy.
Yeah, it does to me as well. There's been a few sort of people said, "Oh no, it's definitely after Missy" and so forth. But I'm still sort of thinking it's probably after John Sim, because we'll get the 4 do.
Yes.
And pre-Missy. There's no real reason to think it's pre-Missy, although apparently Sacha Dhawan has done a history of the Master thing on the BBC website. I'll need to go through it properly to sort of see. But
it's possible they haven't decided. You
could go into a big long explanation, but it's like, I think you said it the other day, oh well, he did escape from Castrava after all. That's as much an explanation as you get.
Yeah,
normally.
And sometimes you don't want to bog the story down with it.
Yeah, I think sometimes it sort of does tend to drag the story a little if you go into massive long exposition.
Yeah. This is something I noticed watching the episode. I think it's still a failing, perhaps, of Chris Chibnall's writing, that his characters, particularly his Doctor, tend to have kind of chunks of exposition which are kind of delivered as if it's the Doctor realising what's going on, but there's something about it that just rings a little hollow for me. It just sort of crystallised in that second episode when the Doctor's kind of explaining it out loud. And it's fine. I think the show was great. The pace of it was still lovely. It didn't have that same sort of breathless non-stop pace as the first part. There was a lot more pause for reflection. I mean, for example, I loved the confrontation up the Eiffel Tower.
That was fantastic.
And that reference to Jodrell Bank, presumably the Pharaoh's project.
Yeah.
Did I ever apologise to you for that? No, good.
I think with the exposition, RTD with David Tennant and Matt Smith with Moffat tended to, with their exposition, was talking to themselves really fast, but then and you sort of got lost in that moment, so it never felt too much like exposition, whereas this is a lot more contemplative sort of thing, and it does possibly slow the narrative down a little and kind of focus your brain on, okay, here we come, the info dump sort of thing.
It just doesn't quite have the panache that the writers
his actual, his style of writing does tend to reflect more contemplative, but I don't think it's snappy enough.
Last year's resolution, somebody had said they liked that Ryan got his sort of closure with his father, but they'd have rather it was sort of in the middle of a crisis rather than over a nice cup of tea.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something in that the balancing act that has been pulled when the show's at its finest is to have those things being delivered while the world's on fire around you.
Yeah, because then you're sort of upping the ante. I really enjoyed it, but that was a sort of as if throwing a roadblock into the middle of a car chase. Mm-hmm. The plot's moving. Okay, we're going to sit here for 10 minutes and discuss our feelings while looking at a microwave.
Yeah, I don't know. Part of me deplores the sort of the sort of flip side cliche almost, which is that every major emotional obstacle a character overcomes is always resolved in the middle of a firefight of some sort. But I don't know. Again, it's sort of about what carries you along and stops you thinking about it during the actual moment. So I liked that the aliens weren't a repeat. They didn't resolve, or at least not yet. And I think we've known about it. What they called cassava or something.
Yeah. So obviously I was wrong about the Vardens. I had read a few other people's comments about things. They said the Vord, from Keys of
Chronivores, I heard.
What?
Somebody posted a picture of the silhouette next to Kronos.
Oh, funny enough, I was texting our friend Ali Mills, and he'd mentioned the Time Monster. I hadn't actually put the two things together. So
there was a drawing somewhere, maybe it was in Babbage's notes, of a sort of humanoid figure with a kind of like two metal bands, one around their head and one going over the top, that would have fit the silhouette, and that was the closest I think we ever saw to resolving those into a figure. So it wasn't miniaturization. The carpet world that we dreamed of didn't realise. It just genuinely just seemed to be whatever plane of existence these aliens are on. Less happens overall during the episode, strangely, despite jumping about through time zones. But the atmosphere was still marvellous, and the scale remained really impressive. I think, worried that the second part would sort of not quite live up to that scope of the first part.
Yeah, I mean, I loved the Paris stuff. I thought that was great. I did think when they met the Resistance woman, I did say, I was sitting there going, oh, please say, listen very carefully, I should say there's only one.
Oh dear. The Allo crossover is
that's
doomed never to
quite ham.
One thing I did take away from it was that if I'm ever an evil villain and I've gone in to sort of interrogate the person I think is hiding my enemies, once I leave, I'm going to turn around and come straight back in and catch them in the act of fishing them out of the floorboards, because every time there's a few sort of lovely sort of use of the time travel concepts, and the idea of having to go back and do the fix after the fact. It's very clever, and
kind of like that.
It's like the laws of time can be slightly superseded by the laws of humour.
Yeah, I mean, it had a sort of timey-wimey thing going on, and it did have a bit of a Stephen Moffat vibe as well, which was quite interesting.
And again, more of the Doctor as the engineer, with the sort of welding the plane bits and so on.
And of course, I mean, the Master popping up, through time, and that was good. I loved his first entrance into the inventor's room as well, with his
terrifying and
sonic screwdriver.
TCE.
No, I mean, that was fantastic. Top hat and all. I
know, and just his posture, his physicality when he's performing that was, kind of crooked and manic, and really great performance.
And then, of course, he turned up as an SS officer.
Yes, and of course, I'd had the thought that the programme later addressed, which I was very glad of it, hang on, isn't he a bit non-white for the Nazis?
Well, I was sitting there going, I was just looking, going, but how? I mean, he's not exactly Aryan or whatever. But I thought, oh, perfect, because that's a sort of another little detail, because a lazier writer, say, would have just not bothered. But I thought, nah, that doesn't really work.
And it was, a very elegant way, actually, and I think this is all props to Chris Chibnall here, because it was a very elegant way of hammering home the kind of the abhorrent sort of policies.
Absolutely,
it's actually quite shocking in the end. I was a little shocked that the Doctor would just sort of turn him over.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe she knows he would escape and so on. And when he does come back in the plane hangar, he's like, all the places I've escaped from and so on. So there's a whole raft of missing Master adventures to be had in that time now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw a lovely tweet by somebody saying, that she liked to think of him sneaking up to the Delgado self in the 70s or 80s and giving him tips, saying, watch out for this, watch out for that.
Yeah, it's, I remember years ago there was Colin Baker had put a mattress somewhere in a park so that when Sylvester McCoy came off the bike, he would land in a mattress at the end of Survival, and he was going to do something for Colin Baker.
They went to San Francisco on New Year's Eve 1999 and painted the word duck on the opposite building from where the TARDIS appeared. However, Paul McGann later snuck back and painted over it.
Yeah.
I think all of these sort of things are a beautiful balancing act between kind of just having a kind of Deus Ex Machina plot device that says, oh, we can fix that later. But I really thought there was sort of finesse and kind of style to a lot of the sort of payoffs in this one. A few loose ends, like you said, like what happened to the Master's TARDIS? Presumably the Doctor's parked that up somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he'll have too much trouble finding it and getting it going again. Yeah. An interesting thought about, though, I'd sort of read a few comments on Twitter that were a bit abhorred by the Master as a Nazi. You know, it's like, you know, oh, that's a bit too evil. And I'm thinking, well, genocide on a planetary scale, or, you know...
Yeah, I mean, check the playbook.
Yeah, you know.
I'll destroy the universe, you know. So the big thing at the end, I mean, it sort of put the main plot to bed quite early, and then we had a sort of good last chunk where it seems to be laying out an arc for the series.
Definitely.
So we've got the Time Lords, but then Gallifrey in ruins, and it was inevitable. It's still nicely horrifying when the Master sort of goes, "Yeah, I did that." But so what lies was it that the Time Lords told, and was it just lies about the Doctor and the Master? Because he says about us, or is it lies about all Time Lords? So I don't know. Are we going back pre-Rassilon here? How much of this is gonna come through?
I have slight foreboding about it, about them messing about too much. I don't really want to know where the Doctor comes from, as it were. I don't want to know too much about his past. I always liked the mystery. I did like the setup, although it did feel like tennis, because RTD destroyed Gallifrey.
Yep.
Stephen Moffat brought it back, and Chibnall destroys it again. It's like, you know, it's like they make their bloody mind up.
Gallifrey is the tennis ball of the universe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm less interested in speculating about how it'll pay off, just more your feeling about it, because I'm excited by this.
Yeah, I mean, it did add some more mystery. There was a small clip during it, you know, a flashback where you see, you know, the bit with the, you know, the bath towels, talking to the Doctor in that awful story, and then but you saw another clip which was sort of something we haven't seen. So
yeah, I should go back and freeze frame that, because I got the impression that there were several people there and I couldn't quite identify them all. But yeah, so nice teasers going on, and then I think that set us up very nicely for the season. So when is the next episode? I'm not. Sunday again. So is it weekly now?
Yes, it'll be every week, and I assume they're going to stick to this.
I hope so. And yeah, we got the little teaser at the end of the episode, so spoiler warning if you didn't listen to that. Yeah,
it was James Buckley in a green wig.
That's who that was. I kind of felt I was supposed to know the guest star.
In-betweeners.
Right. So this is because I don't watch a lot of other telly. So... And then that claw trailing along at the end, I went back and rewatched that just to see if that was an identifiable, it looked kind of lizardy. Don't know if this could be a returning enemy. I'm not interested in sort of finding out until the episode itself, but it's fun to...
Nice surprise.
Yeah. There's clearly a monster, or somebody with a very novelty glove going on.
Who with a monster? What an original concept.
So that's about all we've got to say about Spyfall. Generally a great season opener, and Lenny Henry, of course, appearing in Doctor Who, reminded us of the time when Lenny Henry was the Doctor. He had a show, what was it, 80s? Called The Lenny Henry Show, which I grew up watching and loving. And one episode, which you can find very easily on YouTube if you search for Lenny Henry Doctor Who, you'll see it starts with the Colin Baker title sequence, and then suddenly Colin's face is replaced by Lenny Henry's face. And the Doctor and Perry in the TARDIS. It contains the immortal line, "Perry, shut up," which the satire is not subtle, but they land on Earth in England 2010 and meet a UB 6 million, one of the lost tribe of the unemployed, who's menaced by a race of robot creatures who turn out to be Cybermen, but led by the evil Thatchos.
And Denos.
A man is the sum of his memories, a Time Lord even more so.
Time to spin the randomizer again, but first we are going to discuss last week's random episode, which was It Takes You Away. And just to my own amusement, I noticed that in my show notes I'd written down this as It Takes You Back. So we have both, since recording episode 1 last week, we have rewatched It Takes You Away. Do you want to lead, Chaz, with any new impressions on that?
It was a joyful experience.
You're dripping with sincerity there.
Okay, so I think I doubled down on my annoyance at the episode by watching it. I have to say, I'd forgotten how much of a prick Ryan was throughout this episode. The way he sort of talks to the kid at the start, right? I mean, I know by the end he's realising that's what it's supposed to be, but I mean, anybody with half a brain wouldn't have treated a kid like that, she was obviously terrified.
Yeah.
And for the Doctor and everybody to say, right, we're going, Ryan will stay with you. It should have been Yaz, really, that stayed with her, because that's who she felt comfortable with.
Yaz has had training.
It's a terrible way of treating the kid, because at the end of the day, if you look at that as a real situation, take away the whole thing, the kid's obviously terrified. Her dad's not there. Her dad's an arsehole by setting up the monster thing. I mean, that's pure child abuse.
I still enjoyed the episode, but I think what this is just a really clumsy attempt at character development for Ryan. I think it sets him up as the sort of, in the worst case, his daddy issues are front and centre, but not in a realistic way.
No.
I think you're right. Nobody would be that kind of screwed up to just project immediately onto a child, especially because we've seen no sign of that before in him. There would have been a much softer, more elegant way to do that. And actually, leaving him and Hannah together was the wrong call, because she ran off and put herself in great danger.
And also, I mean, they were hell of a patronising towards her, like writing the messages. I understand that they were trying to protect her, but really all that did was, make her more determined.
Yeah.
You've got to remember, Ryan's still a stranger to her. He takes her into a room and locks the door. She's blind. That's hell of a threatening.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a lot of threatening behaviour in that. I just thought that was very menacing if you take that from the kid's point of view,
Absolutely.
These people turn up. She doesn't know that they're okay,
Yeah. But I think everybody mishandles it, really.
Yeah,
I mean, the Doctor should have known better than to leave Ryan. It's just purely a plot device to allow them to bond, and that could have been handled a lot better. But it does become, they be through it all, and at the end she hugs him and it's lovely, but the start of it is so clumsy that I totally agree that's very badly done. I'd still enjoy the episode. I think it's not for me enough in the moment of watching it to sort of tip it over into non-enjoyment. I mean, I think a lot of the dialogue, again, like I was noticing, this isn't Chibnall though, remember, it's a different writer, but the dialogue feels quite forced and clumsy in its exposition a lot of the time, and sort of lets down the scale of the ideas. There's something about it in terms of I think the ideas in the episode are wonderful, and the fake monster I think is a brilliant twist, although Eric is a dick. There's no two ways about it. I was trying to defend him in Memory last time, but he is a
total arsehole.
I think the only thing you can say for him is he's a man who's shirked his kind of childcare responsibilities for the kind of, for lost love, and while that's slightly romantic, it's also a dick move.
I mean, she forgives him very easily.
Well, he's all she's got, and and he's making the right noises. Hannah is the most mature character there,
absolutely,
for sure. One detail I did love, however, was his backwards Slayer t-shirt that turned the right way around when they came back into the real world.
Yeah, there were some good points in it, you know, as I say, the whole idea of this sentient universe that just all it wants is a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a lovely idea.
I mean, this loneliness is the theme.
Yeah, the loneliness of it. You know, it's a lovely idea. It's just let down by bad structure.
Yeah.
You know?
I didn't think the Interzone, was it called, looked cheap. You know, obviously it was just odd. It was like a whole other set of ideas. And in something that you could have imagined being realised as a kind of big swirly tunnel of noise and light, it was instead a kind of a place within itself. And where ribbons came from is anybody's guess. It's a very strange character.
Very.
Again, it sort of feels like they were missing a third of the story and had to jam in this extra character and his duplicitousness. I didn't think the mask looked all that cheap. It was just fairly, I don't know, just sort of weird looking alien.
I suppose, I mean, as I say again, memory cheating, I suppose I sort of equated it as cheap looking. I still don't think much of it, but it wasn't as necessarily as cheap looking as I criticised it for, but I still didn't like those particular scenes. I just thought they just seemed pointless.
Well, they're sort of disconnected in a way. There's not really anything in their interactions with ribbons that sort of reflects the themes of the rest of the episode.
You could have cut that whole scene out and it wouldn't have lost anything.
I mean, they could have, if there were more material either side of the join, then apart from a bit of jeopardy in getting to and from the tunnel, but actually the tunnel closing is probably enough in itself. It's a strange thing. It does feel like an idea from something else grafted in the middle.
It's a bit like The Last Jedi with the whole casino planet, but you just take that out completely.
But at least this served the wider plot. You know, it develops Rose and Rose and Finn, they free the animals, and it sows the seeds with the kids in the stables.
Yeah, I understand, but you never really go back to that.
You don't get any of that in the Interzone in this episode, which is, it's sort of within itself, it's kind of okay, but it just has no connection, ironically, for something set in a connecting tunnel. I did find the moths very creepy and different.
Yeah, the other thing I started thinking when they were walking through with the lamp thing, it was like a red balloon. I was starting to think of It.
Yes.
In the sewers sort of thing. So it had a little bit of an It vibe to it.
And the moth crawling out of Ribbon's eye socket was a nice touch that I hadn't noticed before. It was kind of quite chilling. There's something quite Douglas Adams-y about the frog, which obviously I'm a huge fan of Adams' work. But like you said last time, I would have loved Granny 5, was it?
Yeah.
I think that would have been such a richer moment.
Yeah, I think personally, because there was no connection to the Doctor. Mm-hmm. The whole point is that the people that go through have something that emotionally connects them. That's why they want to stay. Okay, she chose to stay to save everybody, so I suppose you could say it was basically indulging itself, being a frog.
Well, it took it from Grace, including the voice.
Yeah.
Which was a strange one, I think.
But I just think, as a payoff, it might have actually saved the story for me anyway, as a payoff if you'd have seen the Doctor emotionally connected and not wanting to leave.
It would have been such a scene for Jodie to play as well.
Because the thing I've always noticed with her is in Broadchurch, she does emotional so bloody well. I mean, she's very strong and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. She's pretty good in comedy and everything else, but the emotional stuff, the sort of one-to-one can be quite powerful.
For want of a better comparison, Jodie is now reminding me of Sylvester McCoy in that she's sort of going for kind of a slapstick knockabout kind of fun and games, but actually now just in the last couple of episodes of Spyfall we're seeing her begin to sort of have the room and the writing.
You saw the way she reacted towards Gallifrey.
Yes, and so we've got this darker tone which we'd hoped for is coming in spades, I think, and that final shot of the episode with her kind of with her back to the rest of them, just sort of looking distraught a bit, kind of anxious and trepidous, all these things really rich. And so but that was revisiting It Takes You Away after choosing it randomly last week. Let's click the button and choose one for this week's discussion.
Okay, here we go. the Rebel Flesh, and the Almost People.
So Matt Smith, which the title of the second episode made me also think of the Also People.
Yeah.
This was May 2011. I'm not clever enough to remember that. It's just the dates written on the webpage. So, a two-parter. We have fairly good memories of this one, but a little fuzzy around the edges. We've got the Doctor. Is it the Pond? Who's with him?
Yes, Amy and Rory are with him. They go to this place where basically got this thing called the Flesh, which is a sort of like avatars. They create these sort of living avatars for dangerous work, but
That's
it
right.
becomes slightly sentient.
They're called gangers, aren't they?
Gangers,
Short for doppelgangers.
Yeah.
Not sure if that's made explicit in the programme, but...
I quite liked it at the time, but I didn't realise the importance of it till later in the season.
Of course, because it pays off hugely
it
when...
really, really does.
With Amy's baby, right?
Yeah, of course, and
River.
Amy.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good episode, and it's really interesting because you obviously the cliffhanger is the Doctor and his ganger, and that sort of feels quite creepy to begin with, and then when he settles in, it's like you don't know who's who, and it's Amy's reaction to the one she thinks is the ganger that is really telling, about the way we perceive people, just through, because we have a certain way of thinking.
So there's a kind of class metaphor.
Oh yeah, definitely, or a race metaphor.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than it seems, and it's got one of my favourite guest stars. I can't remember her damn name, which is hopeless.
Who's the role?
Susan. She plays the leader.
Right.
And she's got some sort of medical condition.
Right.
Throughout, but she was in Teachers and
Right.
a few other things, and I just absolutely love her.
Well, part of what we do with this
Great.
format is we remember what we can of the episodes, which in my case can be quite little, and then later we'll come back, we'll watch it, or them in this case, before we record the next episode, and so we can flesh out all the details like who played who and so on. Do our homework. But my memories are being one of those strong plots and a nice sort of twist on something that sci-fi does fairly often, which is sort of analysing what makes somebody sentient or not, and what makes somebody a person.
Absolutely.
Quite often it's done with AI plots about robot sentience. But obviously, as we've alluded to, it can be a metaphor for current issues of the stratification of society in terms of how different people are treated. But the sort of bigger philosophical point of what counts as consciousness and what counts as being alive and being being human, for want of a better term.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's one of those things that it's on the fringe because of where we are technologically. You start to think, well, we are advancing quite a lot. I mean, cloning has been done okay on a very primitive scale, but there's nothing to say that it couldn't, in the future. And then do you give same rights, etc., etc., and the same with AI, how far will it advance? Will it become sentient? I mean, these are all sci-fi concepts, but
well, science fiction's great at analysing where we might be down the road. I've recently finished reading a book called Fall or Dodge in Hell, which is sort of a sequel to another book called A Reamd, which is like Read Me but with the D and the M transposed. They're both by an author I admire a lot called Neal Stephenson, so I'll talk a little bit about him and the principle of randomization. I'd heartily recommend his work. He's sort of science fiction, although some of his fiction is more science than other. He also wrote a whole series of books set in the sort of 16 and 1700s called the Baroque cycle. So it's kind of history of science fiction because Newton and Boyle and the founding of the Royal Society all feature. But in Fall, this most recent one, Dodge, which is the nickname of the lead character, he spoilers for this book, mild spoilers, he ends up one of the first people to be put into an artificial reality. That's the only spoiler I'm going to give about the book. So the book then extrapolates and explores how this might function and how it might develop and evolve as the technology increases. And it's a fascinating kind of concept. Neal Stephenson is great at going really deep into very kind of geeky topics. A lot of his stuff is sort of to do with either computer technology or cryptography features heavily in a lot of his books as well. It's heartily recommended. The idea of sort of exploring sentience and the almost people as a title is kind of captures very neatly, I think, the dilemma.
Really good titles.
Yeah.
I'd just sort of add that it's a fantastic performance by Mark Bonner, the Scottish bloke.
Yeah.
I mean, he's came on, sort of become quite famous since, and he appears in some of the Big Finish now. He portrays the 11, which is a sort of this, renegade Time Lord who all his regenerations are there at once.
Ooh.
He's just multi-personality.
Oh, I see. That's a nice concept.
Yeah.
It would remind me of his role in the story I vaguely remember.
Well, basically he's just one of the crew sort of thing, but he's constantly referring, getting back to his kid's birthday.
Yes.
And it's such an emotional turn. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. No, a great story. I think visually the sort of waxworky kind of melting plastic look of the aliens was very, very nicely realised. They go from looking human to being a bit Odo from DS9 and then being a puddle of liquid. And the setting, I think the location they use is pretty spectacular with the kind of... I remember it being very atmospherically lit as well.
Yeah, it's like a sort of old abbey or something, So I don't know where they filmed it, but it was...
Again, something we could look up. I think it's my sort of tentative memories. You've remembered a lot more, but we will go away, we will watch The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People and come back and have opinions based on something a little fresher.
Sounds good.
We must ask the doctor.
So it's time to ask Dr. Schultz, our scientific advisor. Every show should have a scientific advisor, and we wanted to explore this week the issue of regeneration and the science behind the idea of replenishing the body or part of the body. Now, it's sort of understood that certain creatures can regrow entire limbs. Starfish, for example, can regrow a leg if it's removed. But is there any kind of possibility for human regeneration? So welcome, Dr. Schultz. What can you tell us about the idea of full bodily regeneration as seen in Doctor Who?
Well, of course, this is completely implausible.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Schultz, and we'll look forward to more of that kind of insight from you in the future.
These corridors all look the same.
So, which corridor is this? I've been re-watching the show in order, inspired by Rob Sherman and Toby Haydock's books Running Through Corridors. So I had got as far as Deadly Assassin last time, but since we've recorded quite soon after our first episode, I've only had time to cram in one more episode, but I've watched part 1 of The Face of Evil, which of course introduces Louise Jameson as Leela. Wonderful sort of companion, and I think considered groundbreaking, following on the back of the sort of openly women's lib feminist Sarah Jane Smith. You've got a fiercely independent warrior woman savage, which is sort of kind of a trope, but this was the 70s, so it was something new, although it's always counterbalanced by the fact that, of course, she's dressed in very skimpy, sexy leather. And so there's this kind of so near but yet so far feeling for any kind of feminism at work here. But in the first episode, I'm so struck by how well Louise Jameson portrays both the kind of ferocity and the naivety of the character. Her relationship with the Doctor is very much set up as the kind of Eliza Doolittle noble savage kind of thing.
I think that's the feeling they wanted to go for. I mean, Louise James is a fantastic actress. She definitely portrays this character sort of, with a lot of heart and integrity. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say this phrase, but it was a different time. You wouldn't do that now, in terms of the costume. But the actual character, I think, comes through better. It's a bit like Wonder Woman. When I used to read Wonder Woman comics, yes, they'd sort of drawn her scantily, but it was the character that came through, it sort of transcends the costume. And I always thought it was such a great character. I loved her instincts. She had this sort of sixth sense. And she was a good foil for the Doctor.
Yeah.
But there was also some, lots of funny bits with her, the Doctor teasing her and thing.
Yeah, there's lots of good stuff to come in terms of explaining dimensional transcendentalism, in terms of putting her into the modern world as well, or at least the future world from her time, or from the development of her civilization at least. I don't know that the different time thing has changed all that much, because you still have the kind of the fighting sexy woman character persists right through. You've got Buffy, you've got kind of a lot of genre. Because it sells, of course it sells.
I just meant the costume. That was really all I meant. You do it in Avengers, you have Scarlett Johansson in tight leather, etc. So they're still making her sexy. So it's moving on. I just basically mean you wouldn't necessarily have as much flesh on display. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it felt like she's been kind of forced into this costume because it's like John Nathan Turner used to say, something for the dads, or something like that.
I think in the jungle of environment, her own setting amongst the tribe which she comes from, that's what the costume is. It's a shame that she does in the Victorian one, of course, get to change, but in fact it's pointedly made there. But I think it's when sort of she's in the kind of brightly lit white corridors that it feels very exposing. I mean, and I've got to be honest here. This is something I am ambivalent about this, because she's very attractive. But you've got to look at also the objectification of that, and you've got to look at what this does in terms of undermining all of her fierce independence. However, there's none of that. Obviously, it was a different time in the sense of the Doctor's character as well, because his interactions with her in this first episode, I was really struck with how much he just straightforwardly treats her like a child. Yeah. And of course, she's very young as a character, but there's always something slightly troubling about this in classic Doctor Who, I think, in that they talk about the children quite a lot. So it's like, how young are these people supposed to be? And I know they're identification figures, but I remember them referring to like the TARDIS team of like Nyssa, Turlough and Adric. And Adric, of course, is played very young, but Leela doesn't look that young. No. And whereas the Doctor, I think, meets her like Tom Baker would meet children in the street, and offers her a jelly baby, and he's like, "Oh, hello, don't be afraid."
I think that's a problem with the Doctor in general. Although he sort of, he tries to sort of be your everyman sort of thing a lot of the time, he is very patronising.
Well, we can jump right back to Spyfall with that one, because it always troubles me when somebody has their memory interfered with. And this is front and centre in this episode, against the explicit wishes of Ada Lovelace. The Doctor wipes her memory. I think if the show wants to look at those sort of things, then consent in terms of things like that should be highlighted in a way that was the Doctor at her most patriarchal, her most patronising. I know best. You can't survive with these memories.
Yeah, but it does also put, the risk of altering the course of history.
The show can do that whenever the hell it wants.
Oh, I know that.
What about H.G. Wells, for goodness sake? It's like, there's many a time the Doctor has blundered through the lives of historical figures and not stopped to pause. And where did this mind control ability come from?
That's really just been a new series thing.
Yeah, a plot device again.
Do you remember Star Trek 6?
The Undiscovered Country.
Yeah. Now, Kim Cattrall was in that as a Vulcan.
Yes.
And she was the traitor, you find out. And
Spoilers for Star Trek 6.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, it's too soon.
And he mind melds with her forcibly.
Yes.
You could say it's got connotations with this,
The context of that scene is very much interrogation.
Yeah.
Physical interrogation.
It's actually
in a sci-fi way.
Scene.
So the show doesn't, Star Trek at that point, it's not making a huge thing out of it, but it's very clear that this is not not a benevolent experience. Whereas I think this is sort of glossed over in a way which I didn't enjoy with Lovelace and Spyfall. I think it's one of those sort of tropes of sci-fi of kind of, I am the authority figure here, I know best. And maybe she does, of course she does, she's a hugely knowledgeable, experienced alien, but I don't know, I just think there's something innately disturbing about a character. She reaches for Noor's head, Noor flinches, and then sort of seems to ascend. But Ada is like, no, don't do this, and the Doctor's right on in there. So I was kind of really troubled by that. Now, the link back to Face of Evil, of course, was just, how patronising the Doctor is to Leela. But in that instance, I found it very charming, because this is his approach to a person he's just met in a very strange and possibly threatening environment.
Yeah, it's sort of doing it in a way to sort of keep the person, calm, not frighten them, and sort of, just show friendship.
He's being friendly.
Yeah.
And she's just called him the evil one, so he's obviously got some work to do. So. But no, I think it's a lovely, lovely episode. There's some brilliant moments in it as well. Just sort of, there's the I'll kill him with this deadly jelly baby, and then when the other Seva team says, "Okay, kill him," the Doctor's reaction is beautifully played by Tom Baker. He's, he sort of turns on about 6 different emotions in a few seconds, and then has this amazing, okay, I won't be told what to do by anybody moment, and eats his own jelly baby. And then says, "Take me to your leader," and carries that line off. I mean, this is Tom Baker at the top of his game. I think.
Definitely. I mean, he's masterful in this. It's also I know it's a sort of slightly overused trope now, but I mean, it was a really nice idea. These two tribes had sort of evolved, or moved from sort of the fact that they were the survey team and the tech, and then of course like the revelation of it's like the Star Trek non-intervention policy taken to its logical
Here's
extreme.
What damage you can do.
Tom Baker has done by what he has done in the past.
I'm also watching the new series with my partner, and we've just watched the first episode of The End of Time. And there's that wonderful moment in the cafe with Wilf when the Doctor sort of says, "I've done some things that went wrong." And that vulnerability is amazing.
That's wonderful.
I'm enjoying really that a lot. Tennant's swan song going very well. I think in Face of Evil, the story as a whole is just the sort of sci-fi that I really loved, especially growing up, where you've got this kind of nice reveal of Survey Team, Seva Team, and watching it's right there on the big sheet of metal that they bang as the gong, Survey Team 6.
Yeah.
But the other big theme, which is faced really head on, which is very enjoyable as well, is the sort of foundings of religion, the way that a myth can be warped and, of course, harnessed for political control. The very first scene is Leela being expelled from the tribe for speaking out against this god.
It's interesting as well. Later on in Tom Baker's run, Terence Dicks used a similar idea in State of Decay, with the
cult of the
vampires, but they had actually landed on that planet, and they were just originally
Sharky,
Zargo, and Camilla, that bit where he says, how the words evolved, Sharky, Zarky, Zarko.
And I remember a thrill growing up. I probably got more of this from the Target books than the series itself, because I don't think I would have seen The Face of Evil until relatively recently, certainly probably this century rather than when I was a child. And so the Target books filled in those gaps, of course. And I remember the thrill of those little nuggets of information that wasn't just part of this story, but were actually real information that had an application to the world. Like, the language does evolve, and the myths and religions are founded and sort of distorted over the years from the original source meanings. There's a wonderful, wonderful bit of dialogue, a line in it, which the Doctor says, "To never be certain of anything. It's a sign of weakness." And it's just like, this is beautiful. This is
people that are certain, are usually sort of, they're too dogmatic, and No, it's a great and a lovely sort of anti-authoritarian and anti-traditionalist kind of line, because it troubled me in season 11 where they had this lovely little faithy moment at the end of, I can't remember which episode. Battle of Rex.
It's too cozy. It's too safe.
Pissed me off.
Yeah, I think it was the Doctor's always been very secular as a character, and it sort of felt like it stuck a toe over that line in a bad way.
Also, I mean, the fact that their faith had basically caused all this bloody problems to begin with.
Somewhat glossed over. But that was the Face of Evil Part 1. And if I think of anything blindly wonderful to say about the rest of the story as I watch it, then we'll come back to that in a future week.
It's a wonderful story.
Yeah,
Really
I'm looking forward to the rest of it. Oh, one more thing, which leads me on to Tangent of the Week.
Could it have been affected by tangential deviation coming out of the warp ellipse?
So this is an actor in there playing Caleb called Leslie Schofield, who is sort of Doctor Who's answer to Jorah Mormont, because he reminds me of Ian Glenn. But Leslie Schofield also features prominently in the Blake 7 second episode, Spacefall.
He's the sort of second in command.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember him.
He's Raker. Second in command is called Raker or Riker in science fiction.
Yeah.
There's another thread. But no, he's thoroughly nasty.
He's a wonderful actor.
Yeah, great performance. He's really present as Caleb. He's just got such a kind of brooding menace to him. And Raker is a brilliant character.
He's a nasty piece of work. Really
I want to go from Spyfall to Spacefall now, because Blake 7 is another big sort of love of mine in terms of sci-fi, and Spacefall is my favourite episode of all 52 of Blake 7, and it's only the second one.
I suppose I can actually see why, because it's one of those, it's very contained, right? I mean, you don't have any real big shattering things going on, but it's more the dialogue and more of the sort of the claustrophobia of it, and the tension, because it just ramps up, and it's really all to do with characters.
Yes, it's a prison break plot.
Well written,
beautiful kind of a great escape plot where there's nowhere to escape to because you're on a spaceship. But then the slight Deus Ex Machina is the arrival of the Liberator, which I also hold as
one of the most beautiful ships ever created.
Exactly what I was going to say. It's like the prettiest spaceship in science fiction, I think. The various characters who crew the London, the spaceship in this episode. You've got the sort of tired old captain, and you've got Raker, who's the kind of energetic but completely brutal second in command, and then you've got the third officer, who is the kind of up and coming youngster. And they're all so well drawn in just one episode. These characters just sing out off the screen at you. And also we're meeting Avon for the first time.
The wonderful Paul Darrow.
Yes, sadly missed. We have the sort of core team beginning to gather in this. So Villa is distracting the guards with conjuring tricks. You have Blake, of course, being the planner, and Gan being the muscle, Jenna and Avon being the computer guy. And so there's a wonderful bit of misdirection as well with Nova, I think his name is, the young character who's part of the gang planning it all, who dies a horrible death, crawling through the ducting and
with the
foam of doom. Nova, somebody pointed out, was Avon backwards. So I don't know if that's coincidence or just Terry Nation running out of ideas for names. But
possible.
Raker, though, there's an overt kind of sense that Raker is, sexually threatening towards Jenna. It's fairly unambiguous what he intends for her, and this is part of what Mark Blake's having out as being so adult compared with Doctor Who.
Well, if you remember the first episode, Blake's charges, the trumped up charges, were paedophilia.
Yeah.
Jesus, this is going out at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, it's
6:30, whatever.
So matter of fact as well.
Yeah, it was, when I rewatched it, I was really surprised, as an adult, by how strong the the content was. There's ropiness, effects, etc. But if you actually look at the script and you look at the performances, it's pretty menacing stuff, and that was pretty strong, to say the least.
I think it comes to a head after the first escape attempt is foiled and Raker's all fired up with bloodlust, and the lust part comes ahead and he grabs Jenna's arm, and fortunately the captain sort of steps in and just sort of puts a lid on it all before it gets it completely out of hand. But the character is such a good antagonist throughout the episode for Blake. Blake's fury and there was definitely a sort of
butting of heads.
Yeah. So that all came flooding back to me when I was watching Leslie Schofield as Caleb in The Face of Evil. And just wanted to sort of open the lid of the Blake 7 conversations, because I think we might well go back there in the future. There's plenty to talk about in that series, and especially in the way it sort of ran parallel to Doctor Who at the time. You know, there's a whole world of geeky joy in spotting which helmet appears in which episode of Blake 7 and Doctor Who.
There's also a thing with the Tom Baker and Gareth Thomas did want to have a small crossover. It was basically the idea was the two of them be walking in a corridor, you know, hi Blake, hi Doctor, you know.
Thank goodness that never happened.
Yeah. Although Terry Nation did want to bring the Daleks into Blake 7, I mean, because they were his creation. I think that would have probably sort of jumped the shark a little.
It feels very disparate, doesn't it?
It does.
The Daleks are a bit silly for Blake 7's universe.
Yeah. That, I mean, okay, RTD obviously sort of brought them back and made them a bit more beefy and serious, but I still think
they're still a bit silly.
Really fit in.
I think the sort of things it shared with Doctor Who were some of the model team. You know, so a lot of the writer Terry Nation, of course, created Blake 7 and the Daleks. Many of the same directors, I believe.
Directors, and you had Robert Holmes writing for it.
Chris Boucher.
So there was a lot of crossover in terms of, you know, talent behind the camera.
And in front, so I don't think Gareth Thomas was ever in Doctor Who, was he? But
it's surprising when you think about it.
Well, Paul Darrow, of course, infamously in Time Lash. Michael Keaton's in Sunmakers, isn't he?
Of course, yes, yeah. Jacqueline Pierce
in The Two Doctors.
And Brian Croucher's in
Robots to Death. Yeah, which was also written by Boucher, yes. Croucher and Boucher. I think that's why I went blank there. Could be a spin-off detective series, or it sounds more like A Boy and His Dog.
It does a lot.
Predictable as ever,
Okay, well, we're going to introduce a new feature to revive our flagging, tired format after all the episodes that we've done so far. It's called Doctor by Doctor, and what we're going to do is just simply randomly pick a doctor to talk about. So we have random.org, which is our random number service, and we've typed in 1 to 13, so Chaz is going to click the button.
Okay.
13! So... 13 it is. So Jodie, as we've talked a lot recently about Jodie's Doctor already, but the first and most obvious thing is the first female Doctor, which in some ways was a long time coming, but also sort of felt that its time had come. I think the lore is that the idea started as a joke between Tom Baker and John Nathan Turner, and then became useful news cycle kindling every time.
It was one of those ones that sort of got generated every time there was a new generation.
Yes. But you can look at also the way the show very consciously laid the groundwork, I think, because I don't know if it's on record when the decision was taken to cast a woman in the role, but certainly Twice Upon a Time, in my opinion, throws the character of the first Doctor completely under the bus, just as a way of paving the groundwork for the regeneration into the female Doctor, because it's just not a fair representation of him as this sort of out and out sexist old man. You know, there's some truth in it here and there, but I was really, really disappointed by how the first Doctor was really just in that plot to be a kind of reflection of the bad old days in a way which I don't think was fair.
I think it was still done with affection. It didn't feel like overtly horrible or anything. I mean, it was very jokey and a lot of it, and an exaggeration.
It's all played for that bite your knuckles awkwardness when Grandad says something racist. It was all played like that, and I hated that. I was so looking forward to a re-honouring of that character along with Capaldi's Swan Song, and we didn't get that at all. I think, you know, we got this kind of device being used to set it up, and that was a shame. But before that, even obviously we established canonically that Time Lords can change gender when they regenerate, with Missy most obviously, the female master. So the show's sort of been laying the paving stones in its own mythology, if you like, for quite a long time.
They'd mentioned a few times throughout about the Corsairs, or the Corsairian, the Corsair. You know, from the Doctor's wife. So they'd sort of been seeding it. You know, say, I don't remember any mentions of anything like that during RTD, but certainly during the Moffat era, it had been seeded every now and again. You know, there'd been a reference of a Time Lord or something, you know, switching gender and so on. So
I think the whole ethos now in philosophy is, well, why not?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's only a few kind of grumpy idiots who kind of would cling to the idea that you shouldn't do it. And I think the wish is always that you can do anything with this show, just do it well, please.
Yeah, I think it's some people were worried about the way it would maybe change the dynamic. The thing I've noticed with Jodie is she doesn't really play it as a woman. She mainly just.
What does that even mean, though?
She doesn't come across as feminine. In that sort of...
In that traditional way.
In that traditional way, yeah. But it might be interesting if she did.
Yeah.
Because then it would actually differentiate it slightly.
But that's when it really sort of does it with confidence. Because, I mean, it's maybe not about gender roles or gender performance, but more about romance. Because it's the big change with New Hugh is that the Doctor's much more of a romantic figure, you know, and actively having loving relationships and presumably sexual relationships. And there seems to have been absolutely no hint of that, probably deliberately.
Yeah.
Because of the danger of it.
That's what I was going to say. They seem to have actively avoided making her, you know,
a sexual being,
feminine, etc., because they don't want to sort of muddy the waters, I suppose.
Well, it's a trap, I think.
Yeah,
it's but the sort of woman role being romantic is kind of all the kind of worst of that sort of cliche.
It is, but also the confidence. I mean, if it's written well and it's sort of done, you know, the Doctor. I mean, if a man can do it, there's no reason they can't do it. You know, reverse it and do it with a woman. I'm certainly not saying that there's anything wrong with what she's doing. I like it.
No,
you know, I think she's great, and
I think they've got to avoid this trap
and so on.
They've got to avoid this trap.
Yeah,
and then you can build the character in any direction you want.
It'd be interesting when we go from Jodie to the next Doctor. I mean, I think it might be an idea to cast another woman and sort of take it to the next step. And sort of, you know, to try and normalise, for want of a better word, the whole idea within people, and, you know, to sort of say, well, look, you know, if a bloke can do it this way, so can a woman.
Yeah, I think also though there's the two angles, isn't there? There's the sort of reality within the mythology of the programme, which is well established, but there's also the kind of politics of it, and I think the wider kind of long-term strategy for the programme and the philosophy of it, because it's the single most visible aspect of this new Doctor, but also it is in danger of swamping everything else, and that's probably why it's, you know, it's an idea that couldn't come too soon. You know, 10 years ago or earlier, it might have been done as a gimmick rather than, you know, sort of, I mean, look at the Curse of Fatal Death, for example, of all the Doctor Who spoofs. Yeah. It uses it as a punchline, and very elegantly and enjoyably, but absolutely it's done as a kind of twist in the tail, and that's all it's about. Jodie's Doctor has got to just get beyond the fact that she's a woman now and get on with being the Doctor, which I think she's doing admirably.
Oh, I definitely do.
Maybe with the caveats that we alluded to earlier, that you know, there's this kind of knockabout fun kind of clowning going on, and it would be nice to settle down and get a bit more grit, and I think there's good signs that that's coming.
Oh, definitely. And those first two episodes of the second series, you can definitely see a lot more going on there, especially obviously near the end with the Gallifrey scenes. I always do enjoy the comedy in Doctor Who anyway. I mean, I love the scene of her at the casino playing Snap. I thought that
was
great.
brilliant.
And I loved the bit of when she says to Yaz, "Can we put the siren on?" Yaz says no, and she just went, "No, a disappointed 10-year-old." Which I kind of love that childishness.
There's great stuff in there, and you know, Doctor Who wouldn't be Doctor Who without that thread.
Yeah.
You know, it keeps all the kind of darkness at bay, and that balance is what's so rich about the programme and about the performers who've played in it. You know, there's always been those kind of wonderful moments, you know, I think from the deadly jelly baby right through to the snap at the roulette table.
And I think one of the complaints there's been, not about her, but mainly about the sort of the way the character's been done, is that she hasn't had that moment, you know, that sort of face off with a powerful moment, the way that sort of most of the Doctors you can sort of say, oh, definitely a moment. I think the closest we came to it in the first series was with Charles I. You know, her sort of face off. No, it was quite good, but I think the one on top of the Eiffel Tower was for me sort of.
That's her most doctory moment. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
a doctory moment, as it were. You know.
No, for sure.
And of course, you know, it's facing off the Master, so it's always a good thing. When the Master says to her, to Neal, right? I thought, can look dodgy in that sense, but the way she done it, it's like she felt the most powerful person in the room.
That was
when she'd done it.
Played so well.
It was.
There was a bit of an eye roll.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, okay, you want to play this game, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, I'll call you master. What the fuck?
So what?
Yeah.
You
that
know?
was
and that,
beautifully pitched.
To me, was one of the best moments.
One thing they haven't done anything of, there has been more sexual chemistry between Doctor and Master with the male Doctors than there has so far.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus, Tennant and Sim.
Yeah,
bloody hell.
I mean, and that feels right. But the did you notice in first episode of Spyfall, the Master was sort of creeping on Yaz a little bit?
Yeah,
as O in the casino.
I thought
they didn't really take it anywhere.
At one point, I thought, a bit.
Yeah, it was like a sort of clumsy attempt at flirting, and it didn't really go anywhere. But so I don't know. That's another tangent in a podcast full of tangents. But the so back to Jodie's Doctor. What we know so far, the engineer is the other big character trait.
That was established in the first episode, and sort of it has continued, which I like, because it's sort of I always think with all the Doctors, they're an amalgam. You know, you have specific personalities, but you do have little throwbacks throughout. You know what I mean? So that's a sort of throwback to Pertwee, because he was always had his hands in an engine or gadget of some description. So giving her that, I thought was rather nice, because we haven't seen that for such a long time anyway, the Doctor being a tinkerer.
The other throwback for me is to maybe more in the sort of New Adventures 7th Doctor, but the Doctor of Remembrance, who talks about, didn't we have problems with the prototype and that little slip.
Yeah.
You know, the Cartmel Dark Doctor, the kind of the stellar engineer.
Loved all that.
Yeah, and so, you know, this is a person who, you know, has got some serious skills of making and fixing and changing. And I think if there's an iconic image for me of the 13th Doctor, it'll be her surrounded by a shower of sparks with those goggles on.
Yeah.
It's nice that that's being kept alive with the sort of making of the sort of plane stuff.
No, I really loved that, and I loved the whole sort of, you know, underneath the
guts hanging out.
I thought that was so silly, but it was just so much fun.
Yeah, no, great fun. I think visually this season, the series is going from strength to strength. You know, Spyfall's visuals were just glorious, I think. So with the 13th Doctor, in sort of obviously the early days, the early years, I think our disappointment with 11, season 11, your very visceral disappointment, and my more kind of, when I stop and think about it, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, none of that has really been around the character or the portrayal. I think we've got things that we'd like to see more of, more doctory moments, darker moments.
Yeah, I think the only thing that sort of was slightly irritating me in the first series anyway was the whole sonic screwdriver. It was, you know, she was
flourish.
Wielding it every couple of seconds.
We got a bit of that in episode 2.
Yeah, but other than that, I mean, she was maybe a bit more hyper in the first series, and it seems to have dialed back a little, which I think is quite good.
Yeah.
But in general, I didn't have any complaints about her. I mean, we've only seen 2 episodes, but she does seem to be more confident. I think she's got that first season under her belt. I mean, you look at Capaldi's first season, and it's very sort of compared to the rest of it, but that's a development of character again.
I was not struck by Capaldi much in his first season.
Yeah, I mean, I loved him, but a lot of people weren't, and I can see why. Because he's very much a different character every season.
I think I wasn't
really
having fun in the way that you've crystallised it.
Yeah.
It's like I didn't find the whole now I'm doing a rock guitar thing fun. I found that a bit kind of cringy. Oh well, when 12 comes up, we can talk about Capaldi and the random generator.
Yeah, obviously.
One last tangent to round things off. Did you think or notice that I thought in the Master as hologram scenes in the TARDIS at the end, he was wearing Patrick Troughton's trousers?
Yes.
Okay, that wasn't just me.
I've seen the actual picture. He's got a purple coat on.
Right.
It's as if he's stolen Matt Smith's jacket and
It's just like, that's where he's hiding, in the wardrobe.
It's so you're looking at it going, he could be the Doctor.
There was, the short stature and the baggy trousers. I was
wonderful.
like, what's
Absolutely.
that about? This is not an accident, is it?
Oh, no, I don't think it is.
What is that going to be about then?
I don't think it is. It's maybe he's cosplaying as the Doctor. He's trolling him.
Oh gosh. Well, one more note on the gender thing was I saw a tweet today about the moment where the Doctor introduces herself as the great apparating man. Oops, I mean lady.
Yeah.
And this was a tweet from a trans person sort of saying, I've never felt so represented. Yeah. And then it went on to be a thread about misgendering oneself. I think there's another wonderful thing that the female Doctor is doing is putting the issue of gender change into a mainstream format, and again in that way that sci-fi can tackle big sort of philosophical issues
without getting bogged down
without getting into real politics, or the way it can put those things into discourse, just into people's minds, just to show people that other lives and other kind of ways of living and being exist is part of what's a wonderful thing about the series. So I think we're going to wrap up for episode 1, or is it 2, our second episode.
We've already got continuity problems.
I know. Well, this is just to be expected.
That's sort of Doctor Who for you, isn't it?
It is. Well, thanks for listening. And please, if you want to send us any feedback, we have an email. It's randomiserpodcast@gmail.com. This is randomiser spelt with an S, not a Z. So randomiserpodcast@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Twitter at randomiserpod. Thanks very much.
Okay, and bye. Happy times and places.